Hello and welcome to this Astranti pre-scene video analysis series looking at the November 2021, February 2022 strategic case study exam, focusing on video game producer Pixlwizz. And before we begin, just going to talk through a statement that CIMA has provided with regards to COVID-19. Now, of course, it will be very easy for us to think that COVID is going to have a massive impact on everything we talk about, particularly if it's video games, more people perhaps staying at home, playing video games, the office where everyone works, where everyone collaborates, etc. Perhaps people aren't going in because of social distancing. But because COVID is quite an extreme thing that had a big impact on pretty much every business, it's not something that CIMA wants you to focus on. We want you to think about it as if it's business as usual. And that's why they've provided this statement, because lots of students have asked them about it. So the way you should approach your research, the way you should approach your pre-scene analysis, the way you should approach your mock exams, your actual exam, etc., is to almost think about it as if COVID has not happened and has not had an impact. Assume that it's business as usual. Assume that people are still going into the office. Assume that everyone is going about their daily lives in the same fashion. Now, of course, it does say that you will get marks for valid arguments, particularly if you think about the fact that maybe if there was something that happened, like COVID-19, that meant people were spending more time at home, perhaps more people would be playing video games, perhaps there will be more people using social video games, ones where they can play with their friends online, for example. Perhaps there's more of that going on because they're not going out and seeing people in real life. But for the most part, do try to act as if COVID-19 has not happened, has not had an impact on business operations, because that's ultimately the context that you will be taking the exam in. So just going to start by looking at the contents of this pre-scene, how this video series is going to break the contents down. Then we'll go into an introduction to the pre-scene videos themselves, how we're going to cover the material and what you need to think about as we go through before starting the pre-scene itself. So as I mentioned, this is the Astranti pre-scene video analysis series. We've got a collection of videos for you. And the first videos are going to focus on the pre-scene. So in this video, we're looking at the introduction. In the next video, we'll be looking at the video game industry, and then how video games are developed, the process of developing them, the people that are involved with developing them. We'll then in the fourth video look at the company itself, looks at Pixlwizz, some of the extracts from their reports, their value statements, the board of directors. We'll then move on to the news stories and the articles in video 5 before returning to the risks and the financial statements in videos 6 and 7. That will then be the end of our videos that are directly looking at the pre-scene, but we do have another few videos for you as part of this series. We then have a video looking at the strategic analysis. And essentially what we're doing there is we're looking at all of the key models in the CIMA syllabus, your PESTEL analysis, your ANSOVs, things like that, and how they relate to Pixlwizz. We then have our top 10 most likely issues video. And we have a good record on our top 10 issues, generally over the many sittings that there have been since the case study was introduced back in 2015. About 7 or 8 of our top 10 issues have appeared in the exam. And then the final video is the industry analysis. We've got a big document and an accompanying video looking at everything to do with the industry, looking at the customers, looking at the marketplace, looking at real-world companies, and talking about how that relates to Pixlwizz. So a lot of information to get through, and I'm hoping that it's going to be really useful and give you really good grounding, really good understanding as you approach your research, as you approach the exam. And just a side note on that industry, it was specifically mentioned by the examiner in several exam reports, which is something that the examiner produces after every sitting, that they do wish that students knew more about the industry. They do wish they would undertake extra research around the industry to give themselves more context. So that's what we've given for you in the industry video. So as you can see, I've just put on the screen a summary of the different videos in this series and what content is going to be covered in each video. Before we begin, just going to give you a brief introduction into who I am and also how we are going to conduct this analysis. My name is Peter Steft and I'm the Senior Strategic Case Study Tutor here at Astranti and also the Masterclass Tutor for those of you who are on the course. And I have many years experience teaching the case study exam, including teaching the operational and management case study. So how it's going to work with this pre-scene analysis, we're going to look at the pre-scene section by section, identifying the key points and also applying relevant business models from the CIMA syllabus. We'll also be bringing up likely exam issues and some hints and tips for the exam day as well, looking at things that students often do that's incorrect or things that they do that they are correct, etc. And then we'll look at the strategic analysis, which is where we add in all those different CIMA models and apply them to the case, and also our top 10 most likely unseen issues. And what we'll do as we go through the pre-scene analysis is I'll assume that you have no prior knowledge. So I'm going to assume that when you are looking at a particular paragraph in the pre-scene during this analysis series, it's the first time you've ever seen it. We're not going to be applying knowledge from later in the pre-scene, retrospectively. We're not going to be applying material from the industry analysis, etc. We're going to look at it as if it's the first time we've seen it. Other than, of course, the CIMA syllabus. We'll be applying prior knowledge of the CIMA syllabus to the material. And we'll look through each section, make some notes on it, come back and we'll go through it together using my review. And some notes on the pre-scene. The point of them is to give you context. Because most of you watching this video who are taking the strategic case study exam will not be in exactly the same position as the senior manager in the case, which of course is the role that we are playing. You probably work in a different job, in a different industry, etc. You have no idea about their specific industry, or at least you may not have a very good idea about it. But of course, in the exam, you're expected to answer as if you were a senior manager in that specific industry. So the point of the pre-scene is to give you enough background information so that you can make recommendations based on the organization's strategic position and based on what is logical and common within the industry. But do not write anything based on the pre-scene, or at least pre-write any answers based on the pre-scene, because ultimately you are being examined on your ability to answer the questions in the unseen on the exam day, which might be different than the material in the pre-scene. It might go down a different route. It might even contradict it. But if you just focus on writing answers based on the pre-scene, you won't be answering the questions correctly. So in summary, the pre-scene is there to give you background information. But ultimately in the exam, you are answering questions based on the unseen. So let's take a look at an introduction to the case. And often students miss the introduction, or they quickly skim over it and then move on. They skip along to the financial statements, they skip along to the value statements and the risk report, etc. But the introduction is actually incredibly important. If the pre-scene is the context to the exam, if the pre-scene is the context to the company and the research that you're going to do, the introduction is in itself the context of the pre-scene. So it's very important that you read through the introduction, you understand the kind of company that we're working for, and that we understand our role within that company. There's actually a lot of information that is necessary for us to know and is important for us to build on as we continue our research through the pre-scene. So let's take a look at the first line. So we can see that Pixlwizz, so that's a company that we work for, is a quoted company that creates and sells video games. So quoted is important there. It's a company that is listed on the stock exchange. So it's listed on the Westland Stock Exchange. And that's very important for several reasons. That's a strength of the company. It's a prestigious thing to be a quoted company. It shows that you're a big, powerful company. People have heard of you, etc. Also helps with funding because you can raise equity funding through the stock market. And there's a sense of security as well for a quoted company. So when you're trying to attract new employees or new customers, there's perhaps a security there that there isn't for a small, private, independent company that people haven't perhaps heard of. So that's a strength for the organization. Also gives you some context of the size, the power, the scope of the operations of the organization. But there are perhaps some disadvantages to being a quoted organization, to being a company on the stock market. You have to abide by more regulations than you would as a private entity, more legal requirements and business requirements, etc., to stay listed on the stock exchange. You also have shareholders that you have to appease. So shareholders become a key stakeholder of the organization. You have to keep your shareholders happy. You have to provide a return to the shareholders, whether that is through dividends or whether that is through capital gains, through increasing the share price, whether you're reinvesting money in the organization to grow the business, to grow the shareholders' net worth. So those are things to consider. We will have to consider the fact that we will be bound by certain regulations as being part of a company that's on the stock exchange. And we also have to keep our key stakeholders, our shareholders, happy as well. So that's extra information that we now know just by looking at that sentence. And Pixlwizz generates revenue streams from its games in several different ways. So we'll find more about this as we go through the precinct, but just on basic general knowledge about the game industry and how games work, there are several ways in which this could be achieved. It could be through the selling of boxed games to be purchased for a one-off price. So for example, you go into the shop, you buy a PlayStation 5 game or an Xbox game, etc. You pay £40, £50, $60, $70, euros, whatever it may be. You have the game, you take the game home and you play the game. And that's it. That's how the revenue is generated. But there are different ways in which money can be generated as well. You think about the microtransactions that you can have in games now, particularly for the online functions, for new weapons if it's a shooting game, or new costume designs, etc. A lot of games produce downloadable content, so you play the game through, and then about 6 months later, they say, well, we've got this new expansion that you can download for it. So that's additional revenue. Or even subscription services as well. The game itself might be free to buy. You can download it for free, but if you want to access all the features, you have to pay a monthly subscription to access everything. And also, whether it's business to consumer or business to business. Again, business to consumer might be the PlayStation game, the Xbox game that you just purchased, but then you might also sell to a particular business. For example, you have social sites such as Facebook, etc., that sometimes have games on them that they haven't produced. They've bought that game and they've released it as free to play as part of the way of getting more people using Facebook, etc. Or if you are putting it on certain sites to be downloaded from that. So Steam, or the PlayStation Network, the Xbox Store, etc. All of these, the App Store, the Android Store, etc. All of these are ways in which you can generate revenue as well, and you're paying a cut to those companies as a result of being able to promote and sell it through that site. So lots of different ways to generate revenue from games, and as accountants, what we should be thinking about here is what are more ways of generating revenue? Or what's the best way of generating revenue? Are these all very profitable? Or are there certain streams that just aren't particularly profitable? And there are certain streams that are much more profitable. And as such, could we do more of that because it's generating more revenue? Or can we take learnings from perhaps why, say, subscription is so profitable, take the learnings from that and push it towards the out-and-out purchase medium so we can improve the profitability from that particular stream? There's all sorts of things that we consider here, all sorts of segmental analysis that we could do, and perhaps we should be divesting this area and promoting this area, etc. Lots of things that we as accountants, as finance professionals, can read into by looking at that sentence there. Now, of course, we don't have more information on it at this point, but these are things that we should consider, things that we as a senior manager in Pixlwizz's finance function should be considering. In the next paragraph, it talks about our role. So we are a senior manager in the finance function, reporting directly to the board and advising on special projects and strategic matters. Now, this is, again, very important. We are not a accounting student sitting this exam. We are supposed to be living and breathing this role as a senior manager working at the organization. And CIMA actually provides a preamble for this about what the role is. And in that role, it talks about how we are supposed to be providing advice and helping to make strategic decisions, whilst also considering risks and funding and making sure that we influence our board of directors. So we're spanning the entire CIMA syllabus here. We're looking at those strategic functions and strategic roles from the E syllabus, the risk management from the P syllabus, and also the raising finance, raising funding from the F syllabus. And also the F syllabus talks about risk as well, particularly with regards to currency risk and risk on transactions. So an understanding of all parts of the CIMA syllabus is important here, and also how it all fits together. So for example, when you are advising on a particular project or a strategic matter, as suggested here, you can't just consider it whether it's just a good idea based on the pure information that you are given there. You do need to consider the risks that are involved with this project as well. You do need to consider how it's going to be funded. Are we going to fund it from cash that we have available? Are we going to take on additional debt funding? But does that affect our gearing rate? Is it enough that it's worthwhile raising additional equity funding? But then if we raise additional equity funding, what impact is that going to have on our existing shareholders, who of course are key stakeholders of the organization? So it all fits together in quite a rich tapestry. And one thing that students often miss as well is the importance of the influencing. You must give firm recommendations. Be confident in what you suggest. That is what the examiner, what the marker wants to see in your scripts when you are answering questions in the exam. And that's perhaps a bit different to the operational and the management levels. Now you are at the strategic level. You have to be saying to the board of directors, this is what I think. This is why what I think is a good idea. You must be influential. Think about it from the perspective of the company you currently work for, the board of directors of the company you currently work for. If they asked you to provide a report, they ask you to give a presentation, they would expect you to come to a decision, to give them your recommendation. They would not expect you to go through a huge list of facts and figures on a spreadsheet and then just say to them, well, that's all the basic information, so make your own mind up about it. No, they're too busy for that. They expect you to come with a recommendation, and thus CIMA expects you to give a recommendation here. So that's very, very important to know as well. And think about that as you progress through your pre-scene analysis. Think about that as you progress through your studies, as you take your mock exams, etc. Think about the role that you are actually playing in the exam. That's fundamental for providing a foundation for you to build on as you progress through your research, as you progress through your studies. And the company is based in Westland, which is a developed country and has an active and well-regulated stock exchange. So it's a developed country, so there's going to be good access to technology, good access to education, which of course is very important in this industry. The amount of knowledge, the amount of experience, the amount of ability to code and things like that, be creative, is very, very important. So it's necessary for having effective staff members to be in a developed country and to have access to that education, access to that technology as well. And what that also brings us on to is more thinking about your environmental analysis and how important that is. Think about your pastel. Think about the environment that we operate in here at Pixlwizz and how that's going to affect decisions that we make. So think about the economics. Now, in a developed country where people have disposable income, there's money to spend on things like video games and leisure activities like that. Now, thinking about a developing country where perhaps there isn't that access to education, there isn't that access to technology, there isn't that access to the internet, it's going to be harder to sell those games in that country. And also, people perhaps aren't as interested in video games. If they've got more serious struggles and troubles in their lives, they're not going to be too worried about video games. Then, of course, technology going to be very, very important here, particularly the hardware that is used to play these games, the software and advancements in that always used to create the video games. The social landscape is changing video games as well. Think more about viral marketing. You think about companies like Twitch, platforms like Twitch, platforms like Discord as well. People are streaming their games a lot more. People spend time on YouTube watching videos of people playing games. The way in which games are marketed, the way in which games are enjoyed and consumed is changing as well, particularly with online play and with that social media aspect. So I've just brought up a couple of pastel points there that we can look at. For example, politics, the government's commitment to technology, investing in technology, providing universities with funding to teach the next generation about how to create games and to be adept at using software and creating hardware and software, etc. Economic, the income of the people that are playing the games, of course, is a factor there. We've already spoken about social advancements in social media, online play with games. Technology, another one to bring up here is advancements in the video game industry. So particularly with virtual reality and augmented reality, the next big step in video games. And of course, these are still in their comparative infancy, and it's only really the early adopters that are using the technology at the moment, but it's definitely the future of gaming. So what kind of advancements are going to happen there in the next 10 years? What opportunities are there for Pixlwizz in the VR, in the AR arena? Environment as well. Of course, environment, very big issue, a lot in the news recently about various different countries' commitments to reducing carbon footprints, etc. And video games, of course, the production of video games and the actual playing of video games uses a lot of electricity, etc. So, which is renewable, but it still uses a lot of energy. But perhaps there is also a commitment to moving more gaming onto streaming platforms and downloads only, rather than having the physical copies. Because you think about the material that goes into creating the discs, the material that goes into creating the little plastic cases that the video games come in as well. If a lot of that were to be reduced, that would cut a huge amount of plastic usage. And also legal for regulations as well. This could be regulations in the stock exchange. This could be regulations for what can and cannot be in a video game, and also the restrictions on who can play certain video games. In a similar way to films, you'll have games that are universal for everyone. Everyone's allowed to play. You'll have games that are 18 rated and only adults can play them as well. And to what extent are video game producers and companies that are selling the video games, etc., what steps are they taking to make sure that games cannot be viewed and cannot be played by people who they shouldn't play? or shouldn't be allowed to play them. For example, what's to stop a 12-year-old from downloading an 18-rated game directly from the PlayStation Store or directly from the Microsoft Xbox Store, etc. And the currency is currently the W dollar, the Western dollar. And when you see currencies in a pre-scene, you should be thinking about, okay, so we know that there is a currency, we know that it's a big company that sells a lot of video games, it's online based, and therefore it might be quite easy for it to have lots of international trade, particularly given it's also gone to the point of saying that we have the international financial reporting standards. So that makes international trade a lot easier because we're piling our accounts in the same way as it's been done in a lot of other countries. So if we do have subsidiary companies and smaller companies based in different countries, we can compare and contrast and compile our reports effectively. So going back to risk and finance as well here, we should be thinking about currency risk, we should be thinking about foreign exchange risk. What's to stop us from losing out on deals that we make with companies in other countries? Now, we don't need to go into a huge amount of detail about the various different ways in which we can overcome currency and foreign exchange risk because you were already tested on that in F3. But we just need to be aware of it from a strategic perspective here. Know about those methods, those futures contracts, options contracts, leading and lagging payments, netting, etc. Just to be aware of them, those are ways in which we can mitigate against the risk of losing out on translation and transaction risk due to foreign exchange. And I thought I would finish this video by looking at some key questions for things that we might want to know at this point, and questions that hopefully we can answer as we progress through the pre-scene, things that we can learn about and develop our knowledge on as we progress. So for starters, governance. No mention of any code of governance yet. Often in a pre-scene in this first introduction, when it talks about the financial reporting standards or the well-regulated stock exchange, it will also say, oh, and it also complies with the Western Code of Governance. There's no mention of that yet. And we know governance is a key P3 topic for CIMA. So that's very important. We need to think about that as we're going through. Is there any signs that there is a code of governance? To what extent is the company complying with a code of governance? Often in CIMA they use the UK code. So if we notice things that are similar to what is in the UK code of governance, then we can bring that up. Also, are there any companies that are very similar to Pixlwizz? Well, again, we don't know too much about the organization at the moment, but one of the absolutely biggest game companies in the world is Activision Blizzard, and that's been in the news a lot recently about questionable working practices, and also it has a huge range of games. It, of course, produces the Call of Duty games, the World of Warcraft game, etc. Also, how do companies grow in this industry? Well, Activision Blizzard is in itself a merger, and acquisitions and mergers are very big in this industry. A lot of growth in this industry is done through acquisitions, big companies purchasing smaller companies, incorporating them into the group. You think about Microsoft purchasing Bethesda last year. That was a huge deal as well. That was one of the biggest video game producers, and now it was owned by a company that also creates the hardware. And so what we've got there is an example of integration as well, vertical integration, a game console producer purchasing a game maker. What about the risks in this industry as well? Well, there's a lot of risks with regards to things like hacking. There's a lot of data collection that was done by these companies. Are they doing it in the right way? How are they using this data? What are the risks with accounts being hacked, etc.? Think about the ethics of video games as well. There's a lot of talk about what is known as the crunch time, which is where a lot of staff are forced to stay and work very long hours for no overtime, etc., to get a game ready for launch. And even then, there's the chance that it completely flops. There was the Cyberpunk game that came out about a year ago, and that was a huge failure. It had been built up for so long. There was a lot of crunch time and development, etc. And then actually the game was a complete mess, and that had a huge impact on the value of the company. Also, the Gamergate scandal as well, which is all to do with sexism in video games, both at the companies that are producing it and in the games that were being produced as well, in the online communities as well. A lot of people saying lots of sexist things over the internet, etc. So how do we go about mitigating that, stopping that from happening on our platforms? How do we go about getting more people into the video game industry, both from a user perspective and also from a staff perspective as well? How do we make it more inclusive? Things we don't know yet. What is this company about? What does it value? What is it trying to achieve from its operations? And what is it good at? What separates this company from its competitors? Is it just a particular game that they produce, or is it that the quality of the games is much better? Is it that the social interactions are much better on this platform compared with competitors, etc.? What are the opportunities and threats to the company as well? Is there a threat of a poor launch? Is there a threat of any kind of legal action? Is there an opportunity to go into VR gaming, etc.? And the stakeholders of the company as well. We've already spoken about the shareholders, but what other kinds of stakeholders are important to this organization? The customers, of course, and what the customers they value, the staff, the importance of staff. It's going to be very, very competitive in this industry. The absolute top game creators and the top coders, etc. There's always a risk that they're going to go to other companies. So how do we keep them satisfied? The suppliers as well, suppliers of the hardware and the software that we use to help create our games. Perhaps we use outsourced companies as well that are particularly good at perhaps providing backgrounds and textures, and we create the games and we design how the games work and the mechanics of the game, but then there's this other company that produces good environments to go into video games. So how does that work? How do we pay for that, etc.? So there's a lot to build on as we progress through this piece, and lots of those questions hopefully we'll answer over the course of the next few videos. So thank you very much for watching. Hope you have enjoyed this introduction to the pre-scene. Hope you've now got a much better idea about the company than you did literally 20 minutes ago, and you now have a lot more of an idea of the kind of things that we're going to cover over this video to give ourselves a really good background, a really good foundation as we progress through our pre-scene analysis and also through our build-up to the exam itself. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next video. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you have enjoyed it, and more importantly, you have found it useful. Just going to take a moment to tell you about the courses that we produce here at Astranti for our case studies. And all of the products that you see here are available as standard as part of the course, but they are also available for purchase individually. We have the Exam Technique series, which is a study text and a video series, which looks at how to plan your answers, how to read the material and analyze the material effectively, and to manage your time effectively in the exam, which is incredibly important. Most people who fail the case study exam fail it because of poor exam technique. So that's a really important video series for you to watch to ensure that you've got that technique. There is a specific technique to sitting the case study exam, and all will be revealed in that video series. And do head over to the website for more information about it. We then have our theory revision series, which again is a study text and a video series, and that looks at the specific theories that are relevant to the case study, because a lot of the material from the E's, the P's, the F's won't appear in the case study. It's only specific topics that are frequently tested in the case study. So to save you from revising all the E's and all the F's and all the P's, we've created a more condensed revision series to refresh yourself of the knowledge that you'll need for the exam. We then have our pre-scene analysis series, which looks through the pre-scene page by page, bringing out the important points. In addition to that video series, there is also a video that looks at the top 10 most likely unseen issues, and also the strategic analysis video, which takes all the key models from the CIMA syllabus and applies them to the case. We then have our industry analysis pack, which is a large document that looks at the industry that the pre-scene is based on, looks at all the real companies that are actually operating in that actual industry in the real world, looks at how they market, what the suppliers are, what the key stakeholders are, how they operate, industry trends, and also a series of industry examples that you can use and reference in your exam. And we've got sample paragraphs to show you how you would use it in the exam, and that's a document. There's also an accompanying video with it. We have our mock exams, which are based on actual exams, but they feature the reference to the actual case, so they're on the actual case that you will sit the exam on. We've done our best to make them as close to the actual exams as possible, and you can actually sit those online in an online system that replicates the one that you'll use on the exam day. So you can really test yourself under exam conditions, and we provide marking and feedback for those mocks as well, where you'll get a tutor that will analyze your script and will give you a comprehensive document providing you with information not only on your actual script, as in whether you passed and failed and what you should have brought up and what you shouldn't have brought up, etc. But we'll also give you an appraisal on your technique as well, how to improve your exam technique. We then have our question packs, which is a series of shorter mock style questions based around the core activities. So if you find that you really struggle with certain parts of the CIMA syllabus, that will be a really good way for helping you. For example, if it's the core activity A's that you're always struggling with, or the B's that you're struggling with, you can look at the specific core activity A pack, which will give you questions based on those subjects. And then we have our masterclasses. We have 2 live all-day masterclasses, one at the start of the course and one at the end of the course. The one at the start of the course will give you all sorts of hints and tips on how to plan, how to use your time effectively. We'll also go through the planning process live, which will be really helpful for you as you progress into your mock exams. And then we have the revision masterclass right at the end, which looks at everything you've covered, gives you a refresher on everything you've covered over the 6-week period. And that's going to be really useful for giving you those little extra hints and tips to get you the extra marks in the exam. So do head over to the website, www.astranti.com, for more information about those. And I hope to see you again for the next video.